The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Jack Bennett's two-bedroom apartment, casting long shadows across the cramped living space that had become both sanctuary and prison. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar tune, marking the beginning of another difficult day in a string of many since Lisa's death 3 years ago. Jack stood at the kitchen counter, calloused hands wrapped around a chipped mug, bearing the faded logo of Westridge Diner, where he'd been pulling double shifts longer than he cared to remember. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, testament to another night of fitful sleep and worry. "Dad, my shoes don't fit anymore," came a small voice from the hallway. 9-year-old Sam appeared in the doorway, dark hair tousled from sleep, holding up a pair of sneakers that had seen better days. The boy possessed his mother's gentle eyes and Jack's stubborn chin, a combination that broke Jack's heart and gave him strength in equal measure. Jack knelt to examine the worn shoes. The soles were separating from the uppers, and Sam's toes clearly pressed against the front. Another expense they couldn't afford, another reminder of how far they'd fallen since Lisa's medical bills had consumed their modest savings. "We'll figure something out, buddy," Jack said, ruffling his son's hair. The apartment walls seemed to close in around them as Jack prepared Sam's lunch, peanut butter sandwich, an apple that had seen better days, and a juice box from the discount store. The refrigerator hummed with the strain of keeping their meager provisions cold, its handle held together with electrical tape applied months ago. "Mrs. Henderson says we might have to move again," Sam said quietly, referring to their landlord's wife, who lived in the unit below. Jack's jaw tightened. "Don't worry about Mrs. Henderson, we'll be fine." But even as he spoke, he knew the words rang hollow. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter told a different story: overdue notices, final warnings, and the ever-present threat of eviction hanging over their heads. The life insurance payout from Lisa's death had vanished into the medical debt black hole, leaving them with nothing but memories and mounting obligations. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the morning quiet. Jack glanced at the caller ID and felt his stomach drop. Eleanor Richardson, his late wife's mother, never called with good news. "Hello, Eleanor," Jack answered, voice carefully neutral. "Jack, we need to talk." Her imperious tone made family gatherings uncomfortable, even when Lisa was alive. "Victor and I have been discussing Sam's situation." "What situation would that be?" "Don't play dumb with me. The boy is living in poverty while you chase your pride around that worthless property you inherited. It's time to face reality." Jack closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of his in-laws' judgment. Victor and Eleanor Richardson had built Richardson Enterprises from nothing, and they never let anyone forget it. Their construction company had made them fixtures in local business circles, with connections extending to City Hall and beyond. Through the kitchen window, Jack watched Sam gather his backpack with the careful precision of a child who'd learned to take care of himself too early. "Sam is fine where he is," Jack said firmly. "Fine living in that cramped apartment, wearing clothes from the thrift store, eating government-subsidized lunches." Eleanor's voice dripped with disdain. "We can give him opportunities, Jack. Private school, college fund, a real future." The words stung because they contained enough truth to cut deep. During sleepless nights, Jack had wondered if his pride was standing in the way of what was best for Sam. But every time he considered their offer, he remembered Lisa's dying words: "Don't let them take him from you. He needs his father." "I'm his father," Jack said quietly. "Are you? Or are you just a man too stubborn to admit when he's beaten?" After the call ended, Jack sat in his truck outside Sam's school, staring at the inheritance letter that had arrived 3 weeks ago. The law firm's letterhead looked official and imposing, but the message was simple. His grandfather, William Bennett, had died and left him a farmhouse on 15 acres outside town. The property came with back taxes, no clear title, and a structure that the county assessor had generously described as uninhabitable. After the inheritance. That afternoon, Jack called in sick to the diner, the first time he'd missed work in 6 months. He picked Sam up from school early, telling the secretary they had a family emergency. As they drove toward the outskirts of town, Sam pressed his face against the window, watching familiar streets give way to open fields and scattered farmhouses. "Where are we going, Dad?" "To see your great-grandfather's house, to see if it's really as bad as everyone says." The farmhouse looked worse in the harsh light of afternoon than Jack had expected. The roof sagged in 2 places, the front steps were rotted through, and several windows were boarded up with plywood that had warped and split over time. The barn had partially collapsed, and the fields were a tangle of weeds and volunteer trees stretching toward the horizon. To most people, it looked like exactly what it was: a burden nobody wanted. But as Jack watched his son explore the property, he saw something unexpected in the boy's expression. Sam climbed out of the truck and walked toward the house with careful steps, like an explorer discovering new territory. His small hands traced the weathered porch railings, eyes taking in the solid stone foundation and tall windows built to catch the morning light. "It's big," Sam said, voice filled with wonder. "It's falling down," Jack replied, but there was no conviction in his words. They walked around the property together, father and son, taking inventory of damage and possibilities. The workshop behind the house was in better condition than the main structure, its thick walls and slate roof having weathered the years with more dignity. Inside, Jack found his grandfather's tools arranged on pegboard with the precision of a man who'd spent his life building things. Sam ran his fingers along the workbench, leaving tracks in the dust. "What did great-grandfather make here?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "Your grandmother used to say he was always working on something, but I never knew what." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, testing each step carefully. In what had been the master bedroom, Jack found a dresser still filled with his grandfather's clothes, as if the old man had simply stepped out for a moment and planned to return. "Dad," Sam called from the smaller bedroom. "Look at this." Jack found his son standing before a window that faced west toward distant mountains. The view was spectacular, rolling hills and open sky stretching for miles. In the foreground, an ancient oak tree spread its branches over what had once been a vegetable garden, its trunk thick enough to climb and canopy wide enough to shade half the yard. "I could have a tree house," Sam said quietly. "You could," Jack agreed. As they stood together looking out at land that had been in their family for 3 generations, Jack felt something shift inside him. The farmhouse might be a ruin, but it was their ruin. The fields might be overgrown, but they were their fields. For the first time since Lisa's death, he felt the possibility of building something instead of just surviving. "What do you think, buddy?" Jack asked. "Should we take a chance on this place?" Sam looked up at his father with eyes that held more hope than fear. "I think great-grandfather would want us to fix it up." The decision. That evening, as they drove back to their apartment, Jack made a decision that would change everything. He would cash out his meager 401k, pay the back taxes on the farmhouse, and move in before Victor and Eleanor Richardson could make good on their legal threats. It was a gamble with stakes he couldn't afford to lose, but better than giving up without a fight. "Are you sure about this?" Sam asked as they pulled into their apartment complex. Jack looked at his son, saw Lisa's courage reflected in those dark eyes, and felt his grandfather's determination flowing through his veins. "I'm sure," he said. "We're going to make this work." The farmhouse might be a burden, but it was also a beginning. Sometimes Jack thought a beginning was all you needed. 2 weeks later, he stood in what would be their new living room, surveying the chaos left by the departing moving truck. Their meager possessions looked lost in the large space like driftwood scattered after a storm. The electricity worked barely. The ancient wiring created an ominous humming in the walls that made Sam nervous. The water ran brown for 10 minutes before clearing, and the heating system wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. "Dad, there's a drip in my room," Sam called from upstairs, his voice echoing through the empty house. Jack climbed the creaking stairs with a bucket and collection of towels, finding his son standing beneath a growing water stain on the ceiling. The October rain had started just after sunset, a steady drumbeat that revealed every weakness in the farmhouse's defenses. Within an hour, they'd positioned containers throughout the second floor to catch various leaks. "Maybe we should sleep downstairs tonight," Jack suggested, but Sam shook his head with stubborn determination. "I want to sleep in my room." "It's my room now, right?" "Right," Jack agreed, spreading a tarp over Sam's mattress and positioning the bucket beside the bed. "We'll fix the roof tomorrow." First night. As Sam settled into his makeshift bedroom, Jack wandered through the house with a flashlight, taking inventory of immediate problems. The kitchen faucet dripped steadily into a sink stained by decades of mineral deposits. The living room windows rattled in their frames and cold air seeped through gaps around the front door. Every room told a story of gradual decline, of a house slowly surrendering to time and weather. But beneath the decay, Jack sensed the bones of something solid. The hardwood floors, though scarred and dulled, were genuine oak. The crown molding, despite its chipped paint, showed craftsmanship of an earlier era. The stone fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, its hearth blackened by countless fires, but its structure sound and imposing. Around midnight, Jack sat in his grandfather's old recliner near the fireplace, where he'd made Sam a temporary bed after a section of ceiling plaster had given way to a persistent leak. As his son finally drifted off to sleep, Jack stared into the dancing flames of their first fire in this new home. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, the only one he had of himself as a boy with his grandfather. In the image, 10-year-old Jack stood proudly beside William Bennett outside this very workshop, both holding hammers and grinning at the camera. Jack remembered that summer, the first time his grandfather had taught him to build something with his own hands. "I used to come here every summer," Jack said softly, though Sam was already asleep. "Your great-grandfather would pick me up in his old truck and bring me here for 2 weeks. He taught me how to use every tool in that workshop." The memory was bittersweet. After Jack's parents' divorce, those summer visits had become his anchor, the one consistent, positive thing in a childhood marked by uncertainty. William Bennett had been a man of few words but infinite patience, showing rather than telling, building rather than criticizing. Jack hadn't been back to the farmhouse in almost 20 years. Life had pulled him in other directions: college, marriage, career, and finally the crushing responsibilities that came with Lisa's illness. By the time he might have reconnected with his grandfather, it was too late. Now sitting in the old man's chair, in the old man's house with his own son sleeping nearby, Jack felt a circle closing. Perhaps they'd been meant to find their way back here, to this place where generations of Bennetts had weathered their own storms. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows and sent leaves skittering across the farmhouse porch. But inside, before the warm firelight, Jack Bennett began to hope that some places, like some people, could be restored no matter how broken they seemed. Lost the discovery. The morning brought gray skies and the sobering reality of their situation. Jack stood in Sam's damaged room, staring at the hole in the ceiling and calculating repair costs he couldn't afford. The leak had revealed more than just damaged plaster. Sections of the roof decking were rotted. The insulation was contaminated, and the electrical wiring looked like it hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration. "Dad, look what I found," Sam called from the corner of the room. Jack turned to see his son crouched beside the damaged wall, small fingers tracing the edge of a wooden panel that had come loose during the night's excitement. The panel was about 2 feet square, set into the wall at child height, and had shifted just enough to reveal a dark space behind it. "Careful," Jack warned, but Sam had already worked his fingers into the gap and was pulling the panel free. "There's something back here," Sam said, voice filled with excitement rather than fear. Jack took the flashlight and peered into the opening. The space behind the panel was larger than expected, carved out between the wall studs to create a hidden compartment about the size of a small closet. The beam of his flashlight caught the edge of what looked like lots of paper tied with string and wrapped in oilcloth. "What is it?" Sam asked, bouncing on his toes with anticipation. Jack reached into the cavity and carefully extracted the first bundle. The oilcloth was old but intact, protecting whatever lay inside from decades of moisture and neglect. He set the bundle on Sam's mattress and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a collection of papers covered in his grandfather's careful handwriting. The top page was dated 1967, entitled "Perpetual Energy Conversion System Preliminary Design Notes." Below the title, William's flowing script filled the page with diagrams, equations, and detailed observations about electromagnetic field manipulation and energy storage systems. There were hand-drawn schematics of coiled wires surrounding what appeared to be specialized ferrite cores, with mathematical notations about voltage thresholds and resistance measurements. Even to Jack's untrained eye, the work looked sophisticated and purposeful. The diagrams were meticulously rendered with precise measurements and material specifications noted in the margins. Some pages contained what appeared to be experimental results with data tables showing input values and corresponding outputs. "Is it important?" Sam asked, leaning over his father's shoulder to study the mysterious papers. "I think it might be," Jack said, voice carrying a note of wonder he hadn't felt in years. They spent the morning exploring the hidden compartment, extracting bundle after bundle of documents. William had been methodical in his record-keeping, dating each page and organizing his work into categories that suggested a mind capable of remarkable focus and innovation. There were technical drawings that looked like patent applications, correspondence with universities and research institutions, and detailed journals documenting experiments conducted in the workshop behind the house. Sam proved to be an enthusiastic assistant, carefully sorting the papers by date, while Jack tried to understand the scope of what they discovered. One bundle contained what appeared to be a complete set of blueprints for a device William had called the Bennett Regenerative Energy System. The drawings were precise and detailed, showing a machine about the size of a washing machine that seemed designed to convert ambient electromagnetic energy into usable electrical power. "Your great-grandfather was an inventor," Jack told Sam, as they spread the blueprints across the living room floor. A real inventor, not just someone who liked to tinker with tools. The deeper they dug into William's hidden archive, the more impressive the scope of his work became. There were letters from MIT professors praising his theoretical insights, correspondence with patent attorneys discussing the commercial potential of his designs, and detailed financial projections suggesting that William had understood the economic implications of his inventions. One letter dated 1971 caught Jack's particular attention. It was from a representative of General Electric expressing interest in purchasing Williams' energy conversion patents for a sum that made Jack's hands shake as he read the figure $200,000 of fortune in 1971, money enough to set a man up for life. Why didn't he sell it? Jack wondered aloud. Sam, who had been studying a technical drawing with the intense concentration of a child solving a puzzle, looked up with bright eyes. Maybe he was saving it for us. That evening, as Sam slept on the couch near the fireplace, Jack sat surrounded by his grandfather's papers, trying to piece together the story they told. William had been brilliant, there was no question about that. His theoretical understanding of energy systems seemed decades ahead of its time, and his practical designs showed the kind of innovative thinking that had built American industry. But something had gone wrong. The correspondence ended abruptly in 1972. The patent applications were never filed, and the workshop experiments seemed to have been abandoned mid-project. There were hints of problems, references to industrial interference, and patent theft and competing interests that suggested William had encountered obstacles beyond mere technical challenges. The final document in the collection was a letter addressed to "My Future Family," dated just 6 months before William's death. In it, the old man explained that he'd hidden his life's work because powerful interests had tried to steal it from him. He'd refused to let his innovations be used for profit without proper compensation, and he'd chosen to wait for a time when his family might be able to claim what was rightfully theirs. "The energy crisis will come," William had written in his careful script. "When it does, the world will need solutions that serve people, not just corporations. My inventions were meant to help families power their homes without dependence on utility companies. Someday, someone in our family will understand their value and find a way to bring them to the world." As Jack read those words, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the farmhouse's drafty windows. William hadn't left them a burden. He'd left them a treasure. The question was whether Jack possessed the intelligence, determination, and resources to claim it. Part 2: Conflict and Escalation. Peckham, the neighbor's visit. The November morning brought frost to the farmhouse windows and a painful reminder of how much work lay ahead. Jack stood in the kitchen nursing his second cup of coffee while studying his grandfather's journal entries by the pale light filtering through glass that hadn't been cleaned in decades. Sam sat at the scarred wooden table carefully organizing the technical drawings they'd discovered, his small hands treating each paper like a precious artifact. A knock at the door interrupted their morning routine. Through the grimy window, Jack could see an elderly woman standing on the porch holding what looked like a covered dish. He opened the door to find Martha Wilson, a petite woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that sparkled with intelligence despite her age. "I brought you some cornbread," Martha said, offering the dish with a warm smile. "Figured you and the boy might be getting tired of canned soup." "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Wilson. Please come in." Jack stepped aside, suddenly conscious of the farmhouse's disrepair. Martha entered with the confident stride of someone comfortable in her surroundings. She glanced around the living room, taking in the stacks of William's papers and the makeshift sleeping area near the fireplace. "Place looks better already," she said diplomatically. William would be pleased to see family living here again. "You knew my grandfather?" Jack asked, taking the warm dish. "Oh, honey, everyone knew William." Martha settled into a chair by the fireplace as if she'd been there many times before. "He was always willing to help when folks had problems with their electrical systems or needed something fixed. Smartest man in 3 counties, people used to say." Sam emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the mention of his great-grandfather. Martha's face lit up. "And you must be Sam. You look just like your grandmother did at that age. Marie was such a sweet child, always helping her father in that workshop of his." "What did they make in the workshop?" Sam asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor near Martha's chair. The old woman's expression grew thoughtful. "Hard to say exactly. William was private about his projects, but I remember during the oil crisis in '73, you're too young to remember that, Jack, when everyone was lined up for gasoline and paying through the nose for heating oil. William's house stayed warm and his truck kept running." She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Some folks said he had his own way of making power. I never saw it myself, but Tom, that's my late husband, always said William was 20 years ahead of his time. You worked at NASA, didn't you, Mrs. Wilson? Sam asked, surprising Jack with the question. Martha's eyes brightened. Why, yes, I was a computer. That's what they called us women who did the calculations back then. Worked on trajectory analysis during the Apollo program. How did you know that? Sam pointed to a small pin on Martha's sweater, a blue circle with stars and a red chevron. Dad showed me a documentary about the space program. The women who worked as computers wore pins like that. Martha touched the pin fondly. Good eye, young man. Not many people notice this anymore. I spent 15 years at Langley before moving back here when Tom got sick. She turned to Jack. Your boy has an engineer's mind, just like his great-grandfather. As Martha shared memories of William in the farmhouse's better days, Jack found himself seeing the property through different eyes. This had been a place of innovation and hope, where a brilliant man had pursued dreams that might have transformed how people lived. You know, Martha said as she prepared to leave, if you're serious about getting this place in shape, my son Tom Jr. runs Wilson Construction. He did work for William over the years and knows this house better than most. He'd give you a fair estimate. Jack thanked her for the suggestion, though he knew any professional repairs were far beyond his budget. After Martha left, he found Sam standing in the workshop, staring at the proof-of-concept device they'd discovered. Among William's possessions, a metal box about the size of a toaster with copper coils visible through a plexiglass viewing window. Dad, Sam said, not looking up from the device. Do you think we could make it work? Jack had spent enough time reading William's journals to understand the basic principles. His grandfather had theorized that ambient electromagnetic fields from power lines, radio waves, even the Earth's magnetic field contained energy that could be harvested. The device was designed to collect and convert that energy into usable electricity. Maybe, Jack said, examining the device more closely. I did some electrical work during college. It's not the same thing, but I understand the basics. In his previous life, before the diner job and before Lisa's illness, Jack had worked as a maintenance technician for an apartment complex. He'd handled everything from basic plumbing to light electrical work, nothing as sophisticated as William's invention, but enough to give him a foundation. They spent the afternoon in the workshop carefully following William's detailed instructions for testing the device. Jack connected a voltmeter to the output terminals, and to his amazement, the needle jumped. The device was producing electricity, not much, but measurable, seemingly from thin air. It works, Sam exclaimed, eyes wide with wonder. Something's working, Jack agreed cautiously. Let's see if it can actually power anything. He connected a small light bulb to the output terminals. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then gradually the filament began to glow faintly at first, then with increasing brightness until it shone as if connected to a battery. Sam looked up at his father, face illuminated by the light they'd created from nothing. Great-grandfather was right. It really does make free electricity. The unwelcome offer. The following morning, Jack was working on the roof replacing the most severely damaged shingles when he heard vehicles approaching on the gravel road. Through a gap in the trees, he could see a white pickup truck with Wilson Construction painted on the door, followed by a sleek black sedan that looked distinctly out of place on the rural lane. By the time Jack climbed down the ladder, Sam had already opened the front door to greet their visitors. Tom Wilson Jr. was a man in his 40s with the weathered hands and squinting eyes of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors. His companion was younger and better dressed, with the soft appearance of someone who spent more time in offices than on construction sites. Morning, Mr. Bennett, Tom said. Mom suggested I stop by to look at your roof. This is James Cooper from Sunridge Development. He asked me to introduce him since you've been hard to reach by phone. Jack's cell service had been spotty at best since they'd moved to the farmhouse, but he wasn't about to explain that. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Cooper stepped forward with the practiced smile of a professional dealmaker. Mr. Bennett, I represent investors who are interested in your property. We understand you've inherited a challenging situation, and we'd like to help you turn it into an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? The kind that puts cash in your pocket and relieves you of a burden you can't afford to carry. Cooper gestured toward the farmhouse with its obvious repair needs. This property requires significant investment to become habitable, and even then it's isolated from employment centers and good schools. We're prepared to offer you $200,000 for the land, which would allow you to relocate somewhere more suitable for raising a child. The number hit Jack like a physical blow. $200,000 was more money than he'd ever imagined having enough to pay off every debt, buy a decent house in town, and provide Sam with genuine stability. It was also suspiciously generous for property the county assessor had valued at less than $50,000. That's a very generous offer, Jack said carefully. What do you plan to do with the land residential development? Cooper's smile remained fixed. The area is experiencing growth pressure from the city, and this property has excellent potential for subdivision into 5-acre parcels. 21st century families want space and privacy, and this location provides both. Tom Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Jack, I've known your family for years. If you're thinking about selling, you should know that Sunridge has been buying up properties all over this area. They're planning something big. Cooper's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We're planning to bring economic development to a region that needs it. There's nothing sinister about legal real estate investment. Legal, sure, Tom replied, but not necessarily good for the people who've lived here for generations. After the visitors left, Jack found himself pacing the farmhouse kitchen while Sam worked on homework at the table. 200,000 represented security beyond anything he dared hope for. But something about Cooper's offer felt wrong. The man had been too eager, too willing to pay far above market value for property he claimed to want for residential development. Dad, are we going to sell the house? Sam asked without looking up from his math worksheet. I don't know. What do you think? Sam set down his pencil and fixed his father with a serious look. I think great-grandfather hid his inventions because he knew bad people might try to take them. Maybe those men today are the bad people. From the mouths of babes, Jack thought. Sam's insight cut straight to the heart of his concerns. If Sunridge Development was willing to pay premium prices for rural properties, they either knew something about the land's value that Jack didn't, or they suspected the existence of something valuable on the property. That afternoon, Jack walked the farmhouse boundaries, studying the land with new eyes. The property was larger than he'd initially realized, stretching back into wooded hills that provided natural privacy and protection. The workshop was positioned to take advantage of natural electromagnetic phenomena, sitting on high ground with clear sightlines in all directions perfectly placed for the kind of energy collection Williams systems were designed to perform. If someone had discovered Williams' work through old patent applications or university correspondence, they might understand the property's true value, even if they couldn't access the hidden technical details. Buying the land would give them control of the research site and any prototypes or equipment William had left behind. The realization made Jack's decision easier. He wasn't just protecting his grandfather's legacy, he was protecting something that could benefit millions of families while making him and Sam financially secure for life. $200,000 was a lot of money, but if William's inventions were real, they were worth infinitely more. Here, the teacher's interest. The December morning brought an unexpected visitor to the farmhouse. Rachel Parker, Sam's science teacher, and the school librarian drove a small hybrid car carefully up the rutted driveway, its compact frame looking out of place against the rural backdrop. Jack watched her approach from the kitchen window, wondering what had prompted this unusual visit. He'd met Ms. Parker briefly during parent-teacher conferences, a woman in her early 30s with intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence that had impressed him. Dad, it's Ms. Parker, Sam called excitedly, rushing to open the door before she could knock. Rachel Parker was dressed casually in jeans and a heavy sweater, with a messenger bag slung over her shoulder. She smiled warmly at Sam, then looked up to meet Jack's eyes. I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced, she said. Sam's been talking so enthusiastically about his great-grandfather's inventions that I thought you might be interested in these. She handed Jack a manila envelope thick with photocopied documents. I've been helping the County Historical Society digitize their archives, and I came across some correspondence involving William Bennett. There are letters from MIT, Stanford, even some international universities. I thought you should see them. Jack invited her in, and Rachel's eyes widened as she took in the living room scene. Technical blueprints covered every flat surface. Journal pages were organized in careful stacks, and Sam's school notebooks contained hand-drawn copies of his great-grandfather's diagrams, annotated with questions and observations. Sam, this is incredible work, Rachel said, examining the boy's meticulous organization system. You've created a real research archive here. Dad and I are trying to understand what great-grandfather invented, Sam explained proudly. We think it might be important. Rachel opened the envelope she'd brought and spread the photocopied letters across the coffee table. The documents painted a picture of William's reputation that neither Jack nor Sam had fully grasped. Universities had sought his consultation on energy research projects. Government agencies had inquired about his theories. International organizations had invited him to speak at conferences on sustainable technology. Your grandfather was famous in certain circles, Rachel said. Not celebrity famous, but renowned among people who understood advanced energy systems. Look at this letter from Dr. Elizabeth Warren at MIT, not the senator, the physics professor. She's calling his work revolutionary and decades ahead of current research. Jack studied the letter dated 1971, in which Dr. Warren expressed frustration that William hadn't published his research or filed patents that would make his innovations available to the scientific community. Mr. Bennett possesses insights into electromagnetic energy conversion that could transform how humanity approaches power generation, she had written. His reluctance to share this knowledge with the broader research community is understandable, given current commercial pressures, but tragic from the perspective of human progress. Why didn't he publish anything? Jack asked. Rachel pointed to another letter, this one from a patent attorney in Washington, D.C. This might explain it. The attorney is warning your grandfather about industrial espionage and suggesting that premature disclosure could result in larger companies copying his work and using superior legal resources to claim ownership. Sam had been listening intently and now spoke up with the directness that characterized his approach to adult complications. So great-grandfather was afraid someone would steal his inventions. That's exactly what I think happened, Rachel replied. The energy industry in the 1970s was dominated by very powerful companies with strong reasons to prevent new technologies from disrupting their business models. Your grandfather was probably smart to keep his work private. As they discussed William's situation, Jack found himself impressed by Rachel's understanding of both the technical and commercial aspects of invention and development. She asked thoughtful questions about the blueprints, offered insights into the historical context of energy research, and demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for Sam's systematic approach to understanding his inheritance. Before I became a teacher, I worked as an environmental engineer for a renewable energy firm, Rachel explained when Jack asked about her background. I spent 5 years developing solar panel systems before deciding I could make a bigger difference by teaching the next generation of scientists. Her eyes scanned the workshop visible through the window. Mind if I take a look? Engineering curiosity dies hard. In the workshop, Rachel examined William's proof-of-concept device with professional interest. This is remarkable, she said, tracing the copper coils with a finger. The underlying theory is similar to wireless charging technology, but much more sophisticated. He was essentially creating a system to harvest ambient electromagnetic radiation and convert it to usable power. Is that even possible? Jack asked. Theoretically, yes. Modern physics doesn't dispute the possibility electromagnetic fields contain energy that can be harvested. The challenge has always been efficiency. She studied the device more closely. May I? Jack nodded and Rachel connected the device to the small light bulb they'd used for testing. When the bulb glowed, her eyes widened with surprise and delight. It works. The conversion rate must be much higher than anything currently on the market. She turned to Jack, her expression serious. Do you understand what you have here? This technology could revolutionize how we generate and distribute electricity. It could make households energy independent. The enthusiasm in her voice matched what Jack had been feeling since discovering William's work, a growing certainty that they'd stumbled upon something truly important. As Rachel prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. You know, if you're serious about developing this technology, you're going to need help from people who understand patents and business development. My brother Daniel is an intellectual property attorney in the city. He specializes in protecting inventors' rights. Jack felt a flicker of hope. Professional legal advice had seemed impossibly expensive from his current perspective. But if Rachel's brother might be willing to provide guidance, perhaps the path forward wasn't as impossible as it appeared. Why are you helping us? Jack asked suddenly. Rachel's smile was warm but tinged with sadness. My father was an engineer too. Worked for General Motors developing electric vehicle technology in the 1990s. His ideas were ahead of their time and the company shelved his work because they weren't ready to shift away from combustion engines. He died believing his life's work had been wasted. She looked at Sam, who was carefully replacing William's papers in their protective coverings. Some innovations deserve to see the light of day, especially when they could help so many people. Your grandfather's work shouldn't suffer the same fate as my father's. After Rachel left, Jack found Sam in the workshop staring at the proof-of-concept device with newfound determination. Dad, Sam said without looking up. Miss Parker understands great-grandfather's invention. She thinks it's important too. Jack nodded, thinking about Rachel's reaction to the working device. She does, and I think she might be able to help us figure out what to do next. That night, as Sam slept upstairs in his newly repaired bedroom, Jack sat in the workshop with his grandfather's journals thinking about the path forward. If Williams' technology worked as Rachel believed it might, they weren't just sitting on valuable patents, they were holding the key to energy independence for millions of families. The question was whether they had the resources and knowledge to bring that key to the world, or whether forces like Sunridge Development would find a way to take it from them first. The brothers' expertise. Daniel Parker arrived at the farmhouse on a crisp January morning, driving a practical sedan that suggested success without ostentation. Unlike his sister Rachel, who carried herself with a teacher's approachable warmth, Daniel projected the confident precision of someone who navigated high-stakes professional conflicts for a living. At 45, his dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes spoke of long nights reading legal documents in tiny print. He carried a worn leather briefcase that had seen years of use and a laptop computer that looked more functional than fashionable. "Sam, I've heard a lot about your research project," Daniel said after Rachel had made introductions. "Would you mind showing me what you and your father have discovered?" For the next hour, Sam guided Daniel through the archive he'd created, explaining Williams' inventions with the enthusiasm of a child sharing his favorite hobby. Daniel listened intently, asking technical questions that demonstrated both genuine interest and professional expertise. "This is remarkable work," Daniel said finally. "Both your great-grandfather's inventions and your documentation of them. You've essentially created a complete case file for patent protection." Jack felt a surge of hope. "So you think the inventions are patentable?" "Not only patentable, potentially revolutionary," Daniel replied, running a hand through his hair. "Your grandfather was working with concepts that current energy researchers are just beginning to explore seriously. If these devices actually work as described, they could be worth more than any of us can imagine." Daniel opened his laptop and connected to the internet using a mobile hotspot, then spent several minutes researching current patent databases and energy industry developments. What he found confirmed Jack's growing suspicions about why Sunridge Development was so eager to acquire the farmhouse. "Look at this," Daniel said, turning the laptop screen toward Jack and Sam. 3 major energy companies have filed patents in the past 5 years for electromagnetic energy harvesting systems. None of them work as well as your grandfather's designs, but they're generating enormous investor interest. "Someone leaked his research," Jack said. "That's my guess. Your grandfather's correspondence with universities probably ended up in archives that researchers access regularly. Someone familiar with his work would recognize its value immediately." Sam had been studying the patent applications Daniel had found, and now he pointed to a section that caught his attention. "Dad, this part looks exactly like great-grandfather's design. They copied it." Daniel examined the document Sam had identified, comparing it to Williams' original blueprints. The similarities were unmistakable. Not just the general concept, but specific technical details that suggested direct copying rather than independent development. "This is patent theft," Daniel said grimly. "If we can prove your grandfather developed these concepts first, we can challenge these patents and potentially claim damages." "What kind of damages?" Jack asked. "Conservative estimate, $50 to $100 million. If the technology proves as revolutionary as your grandfather believed, we could be talking about much more." The numbers made Jack's head spin. Yesterday, he'd been worried about paying the heating bill. Today, he was discussing legal strategies that could make his family wealthy beyond imagination. The transition felt surreal, like stepping from a black and white movie into Technicolor. But Daniel's next words brought him back to reality. Of course, proving patent theft against major corporations isn't easy. They have legal teams that specialize in making these problems disappear, and they're not above using intimidation tactics to discourage challenges. "What kind of intimidation tactics?" Sam asked. Daniel looked at the boy with the serious expression he might use with an adult client. "Sometimes they try to buy off the competition. Sometimes they create legal problems that cost too much to fight. Sometimes they make life difficult in other ways." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of vehicles approaching interrupted Daniel's explanation. Through the window, Jack could see a convoy that looked more official than Sunridge Development's previous visits, 2 county sheriff's vehicles and a sedan with government plates. "Expecting more company?" Daniel asked dryly. "Definitely not," Jack replied, moving toward the front door with a growing sense of dread. Sheriff Robert Johnson stood on the farmhouse porch holding a clipboard and wearing the uncomfortable expression of someone delivering bad news. Jack had known Johnson for years. The man was honest and fair, but he followed the law regardless of personal feelings. "Jack, I'm sorry to be here on official business," Johnson said. "I've got a warrant to inspect the property for code violations and safety hazards. Anonymous complaint filed with the county." "What kind of violations?" Daniel asked, stepping up beside Jack. Johnson consulted his clipboard. "Structural integrity, electrical safety, habitability standards for a minor child. County building inspector needs to examine the premises and file a report." The building inspector emerged from the sedan, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the officious demeanor of someone who enjoyed exercising bureaucratic authority. He immediately began photographing the farmhouse's exterior, focusing on every visible repair need and structural flaw. "This is harassment," Daniel said quietly to Jack. "Someone's using county code enforcement to create legal justification for removing Sam from the home." The realization hit Jack like a physical blow. If the county declared the farmhouse uninhabitable, Child Protective Services could remove Sam from his custody, and Victor and Eleanor Richardson would have legal grounds to pursue guardianship. The timing wasn't coincidental. This was exactly the kind of pressure Daniel had warned them about. Sam appeared at Jack's shoulder, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "Are they going to make us leave?" "Not if I can help it," Jack said, but his voice carried less conviction than he intended. The inspection lasted 3 hours and covered every inch of the farmhouse from foundation to roof. The building inspector documented everything: the temporary patches on the ceiling, the outdated electrical system, the makeshift heating arrangements, the general state of repair that reflected Jack's limited resources rather than his intentions. "Mr. Bennett," the inspector said as he prepared to leave, "you'll receive a formal report within 10 days. I recommend consulting with contractors immediately about bringing this structure up to code." After the officials departed, Daniel helped Jack understand the legal implications of what had just occurred. The county would likely declare the farmhouse uninhabitable unless significant repairs were completed within a specific time frame. Those repairs would cost more money than Jack possessed, creating a legal basis for removing Sam from an unsafe environment. "How long do we have?" Jack asked. 30 days, probably, maybe 60 if we can negotiate extensions." "And how much will the repairs cost?" Daniel's expression was grim. "Based on what I observed today, 50,000 to 75,000 minimum." The amount was impossibly large from Jack's current perspective, but Daniel's next observation offered a glimmer of hope. "However, if we can prove your grandfather's patent claims and establish their value, we might be able to secure financing based on the intellectual property. Banks sometimes lend against proven patents, especially ones with clear commercial potential." But to growing pressure. The January storm brought snow to the farmhouse, and a chill that seeped through every gap in the ancient windows. Jack had been working tirelessly to address the most critical safety issues identified in the county inspector's report, replacing faulty wiring, installing smoke detectors, and reinforcing weak floor joists. Each repair depleted their meager savings, and Jack had taken on extra shifts at the diner to cover the costs. But despite his efforts, the list of required improvements seemed to grow longer rather than shorter. "Dad, someone's coming," Sam called from the living room window where he'd been reading one of William's journals. Through the swirling snow, Jack could see the black sedan he'd come to recognize, Victor Richardson's luxury car, moving carefully along the rutted driveway. Behind it followed James Cooper's vehicle from Sunridge Development. "Sam, go up to your room," Jack said quietly. "But Dad—" "Please, buddy, just for a little while." Sam reluctantly climbed the stairs, though Jack knew the boy would find a way to listen to whatever was about to unfold. Victor Richardson hadn't visited the farmhouse before. As Eleanor's husband and Sam's maternal grandfather, he'd maintained a cold distance since Lisa's death, communicating through his wife or lawyers rather than directly with Jack. At 70, Victor remained an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, despite his age, with silver hair perfectly styled and a bespoke overcoat that probably cost more than Jack's truck. His face carried the hard lines of a man accustomed to getting his way through force of will rather than compromise. Jack opened the door before they could knock. "Victor, Mr. Cooper." "Jack!" Victor's voice was deep and controlled, carrying the faint trace of a southern accent that decades in the North hadn't entirely erased. "May we come in? It's rather cold out here." Jack stepped aside, allowing the men to enter. Cooper remained silent, deferring to the older man in a way that confirmed Jack's suspicions about their relationship. Victor surveyed the living room with barely concealed disdain, taking in the stack of repair materials, the blueprints spread across the table, in the general state of a house under renovation. "I'll be direct, Jack," Victor said, removing his leather gloves. This situation has gone on long enough. You're living in a condemned house with my grandson, putting his health and safety at risk to protect your pride. The house isn't condemned, Jack replied evenly, and we're making the required repairs. Victor's laugh held no humor. With what money, Eleanor tells me, you're working double shifts at that diner. Meanwhile, Sam is missing school because you can't afford a reliable vehicle to get him there when it snows. The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. Sam had missed 3 days in the past month when the truck wouldn't start in the extreme cold. We're managing, Jack said, struggling to keep his voice level. Managing isn't good enough for my grandson. Victor gestured to Cooper. Sunridge Development is prepared to offer you $250,000 for this property, $50,000 more than their original offer. You could buy a decent house in town, put money aside for Sam's education, and give him the stability he deserves. The increased offer confirmed everything Daniel had suspected. They weren't just buying land, they were buying Williams technology. And if I refuse, Victor's expression hardened. Then we proceed with the guardianship petition. The county inspector's report provides ample evidence that this environment is unsuitable for a child. Do you really want to put Sam through a custody battle you can't win? Before Jack could respond, a quiet voice came from the stairway. You can't take me away from my dad. Sam stood on the bottom step, his small frame seeming even smaller against the farmhouse's high ceilings, but his jaw was set in a determined line that mirrored Jack's own. Victor's expression softened slightly at the sight of his grandson. Sam, we're trying to do what's best for you. This house isn't safe, and your father can't afford to fix it properly. This was great-grandfather's house, Sam replied firmly. He left it to us because he knew we would take care of it. Dad is fixing it. We just need more time. Time costs money, Sam, Victor said, his tone gentler than before. Money your father doesn't have. Cooper cleared his throat. If I may, Mr. Richardson, perhaps there's a compromise. We could structure the purchase with a leaseback option, allowing Mr. Bennett and Sam to remain in the house while repairs are completed at our expense. Once the work is done, they would have the option to stay as tenants or take the money and relocate. Jack recognized the offer for what it was, a way to gain legal control of the property and everything in it, including Williams' workshop and inventions while appearing reasonable. I appreciate the offer, Jack said carefully, but we're not interested in selling. As Sam said, we just need more time. Victor's momentary softness vanished. Time is something you don't have, Jack. The court hearing is scheduled for February 15th. I suggest you reconsider your position before then. After they left, Jack found Sam in the workshop standing beside the proof of concept device with tears streaming down his face. They're going to take me away, aren't they? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jack knelt before his son, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. No one is taking you anywhere, I promise. But how can we fight them? They have all the money and lawyers and everything. Jack thought about Williams' invention humming quietly on the workbench, generating electricity from invisible forces that most people never considered. He thought about Rachel's belief in the technology's potential and Daniel's confidence in their legal position. Most of all, he thought about Lisa's final words, "Don't let them take him from you. He needs his father." We fight them by proving your great-grandfather was right, Jack said. His inventions are valuable, maybe valuable enough to save this house and keep us together. We just need to prove it before the court hearing. Sam wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. How do we do that? We build a working model, something bigger than this test device, something that can power more than just a light bulb. If we can show the court that this technology is real and valuable, they'll have to give us time to develop it properly. For the first time since Victor's visit, Sam's expression brightened. Like a science fair project, Jack smiled, ruffling his son's hair. Exactly like a science fair project, the biggest, most important one ever. That night after Sam had gone to bed, Jack called Daniel Parker to update him on the situation and their plan to build a working prototype before the court hearing. It's risky, Daniel warned. Court-appointed evaluators won't be easily impressed by experimental technology. They'll be looking at immediate safety concerns, not future potential. We don't have much choice, Jack replied. Either we prove the technology's value or we lose everything, the house, the patents, and possibly Sam. There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. I think it's time we look deeper into the connection between Victor Richardson and Sunridge Development. The timing of these events is too convenient to be coincidental. What do you mean? I mean that anonymous complaint to the county inspector didn't file itself. And Sunridge's sudden interest in your property, followed immediately by a guardianship petition from the Richardsons, suggests coordination. You think Victor is working with Sunridge to get Williams technology? I think it's worth investigating. Rachel and I will start digging tomorrow. Meanwhile, you focus on building that prototype. If we're going to win this fight, we need both legal leverage and proof that the technology works. After hanging up, Jack returned to the workshop and spread Williams' blueprints across the workbench. Building a larger version of the proof-of-concept device would require materials and skills he wasn't sure he possessed. But as he studied his grandfather's detailed notes and diagrams, he felt a growing confidence. William had documented everything meticulously, anticipating questions and providing solutions to potential problems. It was almost as if the old man had known someone would need to recreate his work someday, as if he'd been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for his family to follow when the time was right. Outside, the January snow continued to fall, blanketing the farmhouse in white. Inside the workshop, surrounded by his grandfather's legacy, Jack Bennett began planning the project that would either save or destroy his family's future. The race against time had begun. Matur, the breakthrough. The February thaw brought mud to the farmhouse driveway and a renewed sense of urgency to their work. With only 10 days remaining before the court hearing, Jack and Sam had transformed the workshop into a hive of activity, with William's larger prototype taking shape on the central workbench. Rachel Parker had been visiting regularly, bringing supplies from the school's science department and offering technical guidance based on her engineering background. Today, she arrived with a cardboard box filled with electronic components. "Capacitors as requested," she said, setting the box on a clear corner of the workbench. "And something else I thought might help." She pulled out a tablet computer and connected it to a small device with alligator clips. "This is a digital oscilloscope. It'll give us more precise measurements than that old analog meter you've been using." Jack looked up from where he was winding copper wire around a ferrite core, following William's specifications exactly. His hands were stained with solder, and his eyes burned from squinting at tiny components, but the device was nearly complete. Based on William's blueprints, they had constructed a larger version of the proof-of-concept energy harvester, a unit about the size of a microwave oven with specialized antennas, designed to collect electromagnetic radiation across multiple frequencies. The internal components included custom-wound transformers, rectifier circuits, and a sophisticated storage system using high-capacity capacitors instead of conventional batteries. "How's it coming?" Rachel asked, examining their work. "Almost finished," Jack replied. "We just need to complete the final induction coil and connect the output regulation circuit." Sam looked up from his workstation, where he was carefully labeling the control panel switches based on William's original design. "Do you think it will work, Ms. Parker?" Rachel studied the device with professional scrutiny. "The theory is sound, and your great-grandfather's calculations are impeccable. If we've built it correctly, it should work." The unspoken question hung in the air. Would it work well enough to convince a court that the technology had significant value? Enough value to justify giving them more time to develop it properly. They worked through the afternoon, the three of them moving around the workshop in a choreographed dance of technical collaboration. Rachel handled the delicate electronics, Jack managed the physical construction, and Sam served as research assistant, consulting William's journals whenever they encountered a question. By evening, the device was complete, an elegant marriage of 1970s innovation and modern components that embodied William Bennett's vision of energy independence. Moment of truth. Jack set his hand hovering over the activation switch. Sam stood beside him, eyes wide with anticipation. Rachel positioned her tablet to record the output readings. Jack took a deep breath and flipped the switch. For several seconds, nothing happened. The device hummed quietly, but the output meters remained dormant. Sam's expression fell, and Jack felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Then gradually, the digital display on Rachel's tablet began to register activity. Numbers climbed slowly at first, then with increasing speed. "It's working," Rachel whispered, her professional composure momentarily forgotten. "Jack, it's actually working. We're getting nearly 500 watts of continuous output." "Is that good?" Sam asked. "Good. It's extraordinary. That's enough to power several household appliances simultaneously, and it's generating power from nothing but ambient electromagnetic fields. The efficiency is..." She shook her head at a loss for words. "It's revolutionary." To demonstrate, Jack connected a household lamp to the device's output terminal. The bulb glowed with full brightness. He added a second lamp, then a small space heater. All functioned normally, as if connected to a wall outlet. "Great-grandfather was right," Sam said softly. "His invention really does work." Rachel was still staring at the output readings, her expression a mixture of awe and professional calculation. Based on these numbers, a scaled-up version could potentially power an entire house. No electric bills, no dependence on the grid, no fossil fuels required. She looked up at Jack, her eyes bright with excitement. Do you understand what this means? This isn't just a valuable patent. It's a technology that could transform how the world generates and uses energy. If properly developed, it could be worth billions, not millions. Jack felt a wave of emotion, vindication, hope, and a deep connection to the grandfather who had trusted future generations to complete his work. Will it be enough, he asked. For the court hearing, Rachel's expression sobered. It should be. Any reasonable judge would recognize the potential value here and give you time to develop it properly. But what? But we're not just fighting reasonable people. If Richardson and Sunridge Development understand what's at stake, they'll do everything possible to discredit this technology or take control of it before the hearing. As if her words had conjured a response, the sound of vehicles approaching echoed through the workshop windows. Multiple vehicles moving fast on the muddy driveway. Jack moved to the window and felt his heart sink. Two black SUVs with tinted windows had pulled up beside the house, and men in dark clothing were already exiting the vehicles. Get Sam out of here, Jack said urgently to Rachel. Take him through the back door and drive to Daniel's office. I'll hold them off. Dad, no, Sam protested. I'm not leaving you. Please, Sam, this is important. Take the prototype specifications with you, the ones we wrote up. Make sure Daniel gets them. Rachel understood immediately, gathering the documentation while guiding Sam toward the workshop's rear exit. Jack, be careful. Call us when you can. As they disappeared through the back, Jack turned to face the front door where heavy knocking had already begun. The working prototype hummed behind him, proof of Williams' genius and their family's future, if he could protect it long enough to matter. The confrontation that awaited him would determine everything. Part 3, Climax and Resolution. How, the confrontation. Jack Bennett stood in the workshop doorway, watching as four men in dark clothes approached the farmhouse. They moved with the coordinated precision of professionals spreading out to cover both the front and back entrances. The leader, a tall man with close-cropped gray hair and the rigid posture of former military, knocked again more forcefully. Jack took a deep breath, slipped Williams' most critical notebook into his jacket pocket, and walked toward the front door. Through the window, he could see Rachel's car disappearing down the gravel road, carrying Sam and the prototype documentation to safety. He opened the door just as the gray-haired man was preparing to knock a third time. Can I help you? Jack asked, blocking the entrance with his body. Mr. Bennett, I'm Frank Mercer, head of security for Sunridge Development. The man didn't offer a hand to shake. We need to discuss a security breach concerning proprietary information. I don't know what you're talking about, Jack replied, and this isn't a good time. Mercer's expression remained impassive. We have reason to believe that technological assets belonging to our parent company are being used without authorization on these premises. We're here to recover those assets. The words confirmed everything Daniel had suspected. Sunridge wasn't just a development company. It was a front for something larger, something with a direct connection to Williams Technology. This is private property, Jack said firmly. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Mercer's lips tightened slightly. Mr. Bennett, I'm trying to handle this discreetly. The alternative involves local authorities in a very public legal process that wouldn't benefit either of us. The implied threat was clear, but Jack knew he needed to buy time for Rachel and Sam to reach Daniel, and time for them to document the working prototype and secure legal protection. I'll tell you what, Jack said, feigning cooperation. Let me make a quick call to my attorney, and then we can discuss whatever concerns you have. Before Mercer could respond, a second vehicle appeared on the driveway, the now familiar black sedan belonging to Victor Richardson. Jack felt a surge of anger. Whatever game Richardson was playing, he'd just shown his hand by arriving simultaneously with Sunridge's security team. Victor emerged from his car with surprising agility for a man his age, striding toward the porch with purpose. Even from a distance, Jack could see the tension in his father-in-law's face. Bennett, Victor called. Where's my grandson? He's not here, Jack replied as Victor reached the porch. And these men were just leaving. Victor glanced at Mercer, a flash of recognition crossing his features before he composed himself. We need to talk, Jack. It's important. Seems like everyone needs to talk today, Jack said, his patience wearing thin. Why don't you both come back when my attorney is present? Mercer moved closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Jack could hear him. We know about the device, Bennett. We know you've built a working prototype based on William Bennett's designs. That technology legally belongs to Richardson Energy Systems, a subsidiary of our parent corporation. The revelation struck Jack like a physical blow. Richardson Energy Systems. The connection was suddenly clear. Victor hadn't just been helping Sunridge Development. He owned the company that had somehow acquired rights to Williams' technology. Victor seemed to realize Mercer had said too much. He stepped between them, addressing Jack directly. This isn't about the technology, Jack. It's about Sam. Eleanor and I are worried about his welfare living in these conditions. These conditions? Jack gestured toward the workshop where the prototype still hummed with power. You mean the house where your father-in-law developed technology worth billions? Technology your company somehow claims to own? Victor's expression hardened. William Bennett sold those patents to my father legitimately in 1974. Whatever you think you've discovered here belongs to Richardson Energy Systems. Then why offer to buy the property? Why not just claim the technology directly? Because I was trying to be fair, Victor snapped. Give you a fresh start somewhere else instead of dragging this through the courts. Jack laughed bitterly. Fair, you've been trying to take my son and steal his inheritance. There's nothing fair about that. The standoff might have continued, but the sound of approaching vehicles interrupted them. Not the expected return of Mercer's men who had circled to the back of the property, but Sheriff Johnson's patrol car followed by Daniel Parker's sedan. Relief washed over Jack as Daniel emerged from his car carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the confident expression of a lawyer prepared for battle. Mr. Bennett, Daniel called as he approached, I advise you not to say anything further without legal representation. He nodded curtly to Victor and Mercer. Gentlemen, this property is now under legal protection, pending resolution of patent ownership claims. I've filed emergency motions with the federal court this morning. Sheriff Johnson joined them on the porch, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Mr. Richardson, Mr. Mercer, I've received reports of trespassing and attempted intimidation at this address. I'm going to have to ask your men to return to their vehicles immediately. Mercer began to protest, but Victor raised a hand to silence him. The older man's eyes never left Jack's face as he spoke. You have no idea what you're getting into, Bennett. Some fights can't be won no matter how right you think you are. We'll see about that, Jack replied. Now please leave my property. As Victor and Mercer retreated to their vehicles, Jack turned to Daniel. They know about the prototype. They're claiming William sold the patents to Richardson's father in 1974. Daniel nodded grimly. Rachel called me from the road. Sam is safe at my office with the documentation. But this changes things. We need to move quickly now that they've shown their hand. After Sheriff Johnson had ensured all intruders had left the property, Daniel explained what he and Rachel had discovered through their research. Richardson Energy Systems was founded by Victor's father, Howard Richardson, in 1972. There is a record of patent transfers from William Bennett in 1974, but here's the interesting part. The transfer included a reversion clause. What's that mean? Jack asked. It means that if the company failed to commercially develop the technology within 25 years, all rights would revert to William Bennett or his heirs. That 25-year period expired in 1999. Jack felt a surge of hope. So the patents belong to me now. Legally, yes. But Richardson Energy Systems has been licensing aspects of Williams' technology to other companies for decades, earning substantial royalties without ever developing the core innovation itself. They've made approximately $120 million from these licensing agreements. The number was staggering. All those years, when Jack had struggled to make ends meet, when Lisa had worried about medical bills, Victor's family had been profiting from William's stolen legacy. Why didn't they just develop the technology themselves? Jack asked. Daniel's expression was grim. That's where it gets interesting. According to internal documents Rachel found in the Historical Society archives, Howard Richardson made agreements with major energy companies to suppress technologies that threaten the existing power infrastructure. Williams' invention would have made centralized power generation less necessary, a direct threat to utility companies and fossil fuel producers. So they buried it. Jack said, the pieces finally fitting together. They paid William for the patents, then deliberately failed to develop the technology to protect their other business interests. Exactly, but they never expected anyone to build a working prototype based on Williams' original designs. Now that you have, they're desperate to regain control before the court recognizes your ownership rights. Jack thought about the confrontation he'd just experienced, the urgency in Mercer's demands, the anger in Victor's eyes. They weren't just trying to bully a struggling single father. They were trying to protect decades of profitable suppression. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Daniel said with grim determination. "We prepare for court. The hearing is in 8 days, and it just became much more significant than a simple guardianship petition. We're fighting for control of technology that could transform global energy production and for your right to raise your son." As Daniel departed to prepare their legal strategy, Jack stood on the farmhouse porch watching the February sun sink toward the distant hills. The confrontation had clarified the stakes of their struggle. They weren't just fighting for a house or even for William's legacy. They were fighting for the future itself, for a world where energy wasn't controlled by corporations, but freely available to families everywhere. The battle would be difficult, perhaps impossible to win, against opponents with such vast resources. But as Jack returned to the workshop where William's prototype continued to generate power from invisible forces, he felt a deep certainty that some fights were worth having, regardless of the odds. After the courtroom. The federal courthouse stood in the center of the city, its limestone facade radiating the solemn authority of justice. Jack adjusted his borrowed tie, a navy blue silk loaned by Daniel, and took a deep breath to steady his nerves. Sam sat beside him on the courthouse bench, dressed in his best clothes, his expression serious beyond his years. The boy had been uncharacteristically quiet since the confrontation at the farmhouse, understanding instinctively that today's proceedings would determine their future. "Are you ready, buddy?" Jack asked. Sam nodded, his hands slipping into his father's. "I wish Ms. Parker could sit with us." "She'll be here soon," Jack assured him. "She's bringing the prototype documentation for Daniel." The past 8 days had been a whirlwind of preparation. Daniel had filed emergency motions to consolidate the guardianship hearing with their patent ownership claims, arguing that the issues were inextricably linked. Judge Eleanor Grant, a seasoned jurist with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, had agreed setting today's hearing to address both matters. The courthouse doors swung open, and Rachel Parker hurried in carrying a leather portfolio and looking slightly flushed from her rush. She spotted them immediately and crossed the marble lobby with quick steps. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sitting beside Sam. "The university's engineering department needed extra time with their analysis of the output readings." "What did they say?" Jack asked anxiously. Rachel's face broke into a smile. "They confirmed everything. The prototype generates continuous power at efficiency levels far beyond anything currently on the market. Professor Abernathy called it the most significant energy innovation since nuclear power." The news should have been cause for celebration, but Jack felt only grim determination. Scientific validation wouldn't matter if they lost the legal battle for ownership. Daniel Parker emerged from a conference room, his expression carefully neutral, despite the tension evident in his posture. Behind him followed a team of 3 associates, each carrying document boxes and laptop computers. "They're here," Daniel said quietly, nodding toward the main entrance. Victor and Eleanor Richardson entered the courthouse like visiting dignitaries, flanked by a phalanx of attorneys led by Margaret Simmons, a legendary corporate defender whose fees reportedly started at $1,000 per hour. Behind them came James Cooper and several executives from Sunridge Development, all wearing nearly identical dark suits. What struck Jack most was the size of their legal team, at least 8 attorneys plus support staff compared to Daniel and his 3 associates. The imbalance of resources couldn't have been more obvious. Sam's hand tightened around Jack's. "That's a lot of lawyers, Dad." "Numbers don't always win cases," Jack replied, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "Truth matters, too." At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called them into courtroom 3. Judge Eleanor Grant entered moments later, a woman in her 70s with silver hair cut in a practical bob and eyes that missed nothing behind simple wireframe glasses. "This is a consolidated hearing addressing both a guardianship petition and patent ownership claims." Judge Grant began, her voice carrying the slight raspiness of age but losing none of its authority. "Given the interconnected nature of these issues, I'll allow presentation of evidence related to both matters simultaneously." She surveyed the assembled attorneys with a critical eye. "However, I will not tolerate redundant arguments or delaying tactics. Ms. Simmons, Mr. Parker, you will each present your cases concisely and respectfully. Is that understood?" Both attorneys nodded their agreement, though Jack noticed the slight tightening of Margaret Simmons's jaw at being addressed as an equal to Daniel, rather than as the superior legal force her reputation suggested. Daniel's opening statement was masterful, a clear, compelling narrative that traced William Bennett's journey from innovative farmer to victim of corporate suppression. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about 2 things." Daniel said, his voice carrying the controlled passion of someone who genuinely believed in his cause. It's about a father's right to raise his son in a home with extraordinary potential, and about whether corporations can steal innovations from individual inventors and profit from suppressing them for decades. He walked the judge through the timeline of events using Williams' own words from letters and journals to illustrate how a brilliant inventor had been systematically deceived by Howard Richardson, who had promised to develop the technology, but instead buried it to protect other business interests. Margaret Simmons' opening was equally polished, but focused on technical legal arguments designed to obscure the moral clarity of the situation. She argued that the reversion clause was ambiguous, that Richardson Energy had made good faith efforts to develop the technology, and that Jack had waited too long to assert his claims. The plaintiffs are essentially asking this court to void legitimate business agreements based on retrospective interpretations of contractual language. Simmons said, her voice precise and measured. Such a precedent would undermine the stability of commercial relationships and discourage investment in innovative technologies. The morning session focused on technical evidence with expert witnesses explaining the revolutionary nature of Williams Energy Systems and documenting how they had influenced subsequent developments in the field. One elderly professor, Dr. Harold Abernathy from the university's engineering department, was particularly effective describing the prototype's performance in terms that even a non-technical judge could appreciate. What we're seeing here, Dr. Abernathy testified, is nothing short of revolutionary. Bennett's device generates substantial electrical power using only ambient electromagnetic fields, something the scientific community has been pursuing for decades with limited success. The efficiency levels are extraordinary, suggesting applications that could transform global energy production. During the lunch break, Daniel pulled Jack aside to discuss strategy for the afternoon session. Simmons is going to focus on the reversion clause language, trying to convince the judge that commercialization doesn't require actual manufacturing. We need to be ready with evidence that Richardson never intended to develop the technology. The afternoon session began with Daniel presenting a series of internal Richardson Energy memos that painted a damning picture of corporate strategy. The documents showed that company executives had explicitly discussed suppressing Williams' technology to protect their investments in traditional energy infrastructure. Our analysis indicates that widespread adoption of the Bennett Energy Systems could reduce demand for our core services by 60 to 70%, one memo stated. Recommendation: maintain patent control to prevent commercial development by competitors. Simmons objected repeatedly to the admission of these documents, arguing they were taken out of context and misrepresented legitimate business planning. But Judge Grant allowed them into evidence, and their impact was devastating to Richardson Energy's claims about good faith development efforts. The key moment came when Daniel called Victor Richardson himself to testify. The old man approached the witness stand with visible reluctance, his usual confidence replaced by the wariness of someone who knew he was about to face questions he couldn't answer honestly. Daniel's examination was surgical in its precision. Step by step, he led Richardson through the timeline of his father's acquisition of Williams' patents, the promises to develop the technology, and the subsequent licensing deals with major corporations. Mr. Richardson, in 50 years of ownership, has Richardson Energy Systems ever manufactured a single device based on William Bennett's patents? Daniel asked. We explored various development possibilities, Richardson replied evasively. That's not what I asked. Have you ever manufactured anything? No. Have you ever established manufacturing facilities for this purpose? No. Have you ever hired engineers specifically to develop this technology? We consulted with various experts. Mr. Richardson, yes or no? In 50 years, has your company made any genuine effort to bring William Bennett's inventions to market? The pause stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Richardson answered in a voice barely above a whisper. No. The admission echoed through the courtroom. Even Simmons seemed momentarily stunned by her client's honesty, though she quickly moved to limit the damage through redirect examination. As the testimonial phase concluded, Jack noticed something unexpected in Victor Richardson's demeanor. The man seemed deflated, the aggressive confidence that had characterized their previous encounters replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. In the gallery, Eleanor Richardson watched her husband with an expression Jack couldn't quite interpret. Concern, certainly, but also something that might have been disappointment or even anger. Judge Grant announced a brief recess before closing arguments, and Jack found himself standing near the water fountain when Victor approached, having separated himself from his legal team. For a moment, the two men stood in awkward silence, adversaries momentarily removed from the battlefield. "You really love him, don't you?" Victor said finally. It wasn't a question. "More than anything," Jack replied. Victor nodded slowly. "Lisa used to tell us that. Eleanor and I, we didn't want to believe it. It was easier to think you weren't good enough for her, that you couldn't be a proper father." "Why are you telling me this now?" Victor looked away, his gaze fixing on some distant point. "I spent my life building something I thought would last, a legacy for my family. My father taught me that's what matters most. But watching you fight for Sam, for that old house, for Bennett's inventions," he shook his head. "Maybe I was wrong about what makes a legacy worth having." Before Jack could respond, Simmons appeared at Victor's elbow, her expression making it clear that unsupervised conversations with the opposition were not permitted. She guided him back to the Richardson legal team, leaving Jack to wonder if he glimpsed a moment of genuine reflection or simply another tactical maneuver. As closing arguments began, Jack found himself studying Victor's face, searching for some clue to the man's true thoughts. But the corporate mask had returned, revealing nothing of the brief vulnerability he'd witnessed. Daniel's closing argument focused on the human story at the heart of the case. William Bennett's brilliant innovation, the deception that had buried it for 50 years, and Jack's determination to honor his grandfather's legacy while providing a stable home for his son. "Your Honor," Daniel concluded, "this court has an opportunity to right a historic wrong. William Bennett created technology that could have transformed how ordinary families access electricity. Instead, that innovation was deliberately suppressed to protect corporate profits. Now his grandson and great-grandson have a chance to fulfill his vision, but only if this court recognizes their rightful ownership and allows them to remain together in the home William left them." Simmons countered with a technically precise argument about contract law, patent protection terms, and the dangers of retroactively reinterpreting decades-old business agreements. Her presentation was flawless, but mechanical, lacking the emotional resonance of Daniel's appeal to justice and family bonds. As Judge Grant adjourned to consider her ruling, promising a decision within 48 hours, Jack felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. They had presented the strongest case possible, exposed Richardson Energy's deception, and demonstrated the value of Williams' technology. But would it be enough? Or would corporate power prevail, as it had so often before? Sam joined him as they exited the courtroom, slipping his hand into Jack's, with the trust that had sustained them both through months of struggle. "What happens now, Dad?" he asked. "Now we wait," Jack replied, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "And we hope that Judge Grant understands what's really at stake here." They walked together through the courthouse's grand hallway, father and son united against forces that had tried repeatedly to separate them. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it the way they had faced every challenge since Lisa's death, together with the determination that had become their family's defining characteristic. The verdict. The call came at 7:30 a.m., 2 days after the hearing. "Judge Grant will read her ruling at 10 a.m. this morning," the clerk's neutral voice informed Jack. "All parties should be present." Jack's hands shook as he hung up the phone. After 2 days of waiting, of alternating between hope and despair, of trying to maintain normal routines while their entire future hung in the balance, the moment of truth had finally arrived. "Sam," he called upstairs, "get dressed. We're going to court." His son appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing pajamas, but his eyes alert and focused. "Is today the day?" "Today's the day." The drive to the courthouse passed in a blur of nervous energy and last-minute reassurances. Daniel met them at the security checkpoint, looking professionally composed despite the tension radiating from his posture. "Any hints about which way this might go?" Jack asked. "Grant is impossible to read," Daniel replied. "But the fact that she's announcing the decision in open court, rather than just filing written orders, suggests she wants to make a statement." The courtroom was more crowded than Jack had expected. In addition to the attorneys and principals, reporters from several business publications had somehow learned about the hearing. The patent dispute had attracted attention in legal circles as a test case for how courts would handle corporate theft of individual inventors' work. Victor and Eleanor Richardson sat at the defendant's table, surrounded by their legal team, but Victor's usual arrogance had been replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. Eleanor flanked him, her face set in an expression of resigned defiance. At exactly 10 a.m., when Judge Grant entered the courtroom and took her seat with the deliberate movements of someone who understood the weight of the moment. She had clearly given considerable thought to her decision, and her opening words suggested she intended to address not just the legal issues, but their broader implications. This case presents fundamental questions about the relationship between individual innovation and corporate power. Judge Grant began, her voice carrying the wisdom of decades on the bench. The court has carefully considered the evidence, the applicable law, and the long-term consequences of its decision. She reviewed the facts methodically, walking through Williams' original invention, his decision to trust Howard Richardson in the subsequent 50 years of patent suppression and corporate profiteering. Her recitation was clinical but devastating to Richardson's position. The defendant, Richardson Energy Systems, argues that its licensing activities constitute good faith efforts to commercialize the plaintiff's technology. The court finds this argument wholly without merit. Sam's small hand slipped into Jack's, providing strength at the moment when his own courage threatened to falter. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Richardson Energy acquired the Bennett patents with no intention of developing them for public benefit. Instead, the company systematically suppressed revolutionary technology while profiting from licensing agreements that generated over $120 million in revenue. Judge Grant's voice grew stern as she addressed the defendants directly. This court finds that Richardson Energy Systems violated both the letter and spirit of its 1974 agreement with William Bennett. The reversion clause was unambiguous. Failure to commercialize within 25 years would return all rights to the inventor's heirs. The judge paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the courtroom. Jack could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears as she prepared to announce the specific terms of her decision. Therefore, the court hereby orders that all patent rights to the Bennett Energy Systems immediately revert to Jack Bennett and Samuel Bennett as the lawful heirs of William Bennett. Furthermore, Richardson Energy Systems is ordered to cease all licensing activities and prepare a full accounting of profits generated from these patents since 1999. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of gasps, whispered conversations, and the frantic scratching of reporters' pens. Daniel squeezed Jack's shoulder, his professional composure cracking just enough to reveal a triumphant smile. But Judge Grant wasn't finished. Additionally, the court finds that Richardson Energy Systems' conduct constitutes willful patent infringement and unjust enrichment. The company is hereby ordered to pay restitution of $127 million, representing the full amount of licensing revenue generated through unauthorized use of the plaintiff's intellectual property. The number hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt, $127 million, an amount so large that Jack couldn't fully process its meaning. Sam looked up at his father with wide eyes, as if seeking confirmation that he'd heard correctly. Margaret Simmons immediately rose to address the court. Your Honor, the defendants respectfully request a stay of this order pending appeal. Denied, Judge Grant said firmly. The defendants have profited from stolen intellectual property for 24 years. They can begin making restitution immediately while pursuing whatever appeals they deem appropriate. She turned to address Daniel directly. Counselor, please coordinate with the court's financial officers to establish appropriate mechanisms for asset transfer and ongoing monitoring of compliance. As the judge prepared to leave the bench, she delivered one final observation that would be quoted in legal journals for years to come. This case serves as a reminder that innovation belongs to innovators, not to those with the power to suppress it. The court will not allow corporate theft to be legitimized through the passage of time. The gavel fell with the finality of thunder, and suddenly the courtroom exploded into controlled chaos. Reporters rushed toward Daniel and Jack, their questions overlapping in an unintelligible jumble. Simmons huddled with her clients at the defendant's table, her face grim, as she began explaining their limited options for appeal. Daniel guided Jack and Sam through the crowd toward a conference room where they could speak privately. The walk felt surreal, as if Jack were watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. We won, Sam said, his voice filled with wonder. We actually won. You did more than win, Daniel replied. You achieved one of the largest patent settlements in history. But more importantly, you restored your great-grandfather's reputation and ensured his inventions will finally reach the people he meant them to help. In the quiet of the conference room, away from the media circus and legal maneuvering, the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. They weren't just wealthy now, they were wealthy enough to pursue William's original vision without compromise or interference. What happens next? Jack asked, still trying to process the transformation of their circumstances. Richardson Energy will probably appeal, but appeals courts rarely overturn factual findings this clear, Daniel explained. Meanwhile, you need to decide how you want to manage your grandfather's technology and the resources to develop it properly. Sam had been unusually quiet during the adult conversation, but now he spoke up with the clarity that had guided them through this entire journey. We're going to build great-grandfather's machines and help families save money on electricity. That's what he wanted. Jack looked at his son, thought about William's vision of energy independence for working families, and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They had won the legal battle, but the real work, the work of bringing revolutionary technology to the world, was just beginning. Yes, buddy, he said, that's exactly what we're going to do. The new beginning. The April morning light streamed through the gleaming windows of the restored farmhouse, illuminating rooms that had been transformed from decay to demonstration of what was possible when innovation served people instead of just profit. Jack stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast while watching Sam practice soccer in the backyard, marveling at how completely their lives had changed while somehow remaining fundamentally the same. The farmhouse had become everything William had dreamed it could be, a working showcase for sustainable technology that proved families could live comfortably while generating their own energy. Solar panels covered the south-facing roof, battery banks stored power in the basement, and Williams' electromagnetic collection system hummed quietly in the workshop, contributing clean electricity to a grid that had once seemed impossibly expensive. More importantly, the house had become a home in ways that transcended its physical improvements. Sam's confidence had blossomed along with their financial security, but he remained the thoughtful, determined boy who had helped organize his great-grandfather's by lamplight in a drafty living room. Success hadn't changed their essential relationship, father and son working together toward goals that mattered more than personal wealth. "Dad, Ms. Parker is here," Sam called from the backyard, waving toward the driveway where Rachel's car was approaching. Rachel had become an integral part of their new life, her relationship with Jack developing naturally from friendship through shared purpose into something deeper and more permanent. She brought wisdom, humor, and stability to their family dynamic, while her educational background helped them navigate the complex world of technology development and public outreach. "The first production units are ready for testing," Rachel announced as she joined them for breakfast, consulting the tablet where she tracked their foundation's activities. The manufacturing facility in Tennessee completed initial assembly last week, and the quality control tests exceeded all specifications. They had spent months establishing Bennett Energy Solutions as a company dedicated to bringing Williams technology to working families at affordable prices. Rather than licensing the patents to large corporations, they had built their own manufacturing capability and distribution network designed to serve people who needed energy independence most. "How many orders do we have?" Sam asked, his interest in the business side of their operation reflecting his growing understanding that great inventions meant nothing without great execution. 1,200 families so far, Rachel replied, and the waiting list grows every day. The first customers had been people like themselves, families struggling with high utility bills, single parents trying to create stability for their children, elderly couples on fixed incomes who couldn't afford rising energy costs. Each installation represented not just a commercial transaction, but the fulfillment of Williams' original vision. "Your great-grandfather would be so proud," Jack told Sam, as they reviewed the morning's reports. "His inventions are finally helping their people he always meant them to help." The doorbell interrupted their planning session, and Jack found Tom Wilson on the front porch holding an official-looking document and wearing the pleased expression of someone delivering good news. "Thought you'd want to see this right away," Tom said, handing Jack a letter from the county assessor's office. "They've officially designated this property as a historical landmark. The farmhouse and workshop are now protected as the birthplace of revolutionary energy technology." The designation meant that Williams' legacy would be preserved for future generations, ensuring that the story of his innovations and the long struggle to claim them would continue inspiring inventors and entrepreneurs facing their own battles against entrenched interests. Sam had been reading over his father's shoulder, and now he spoke with the satisfaction of someone who understood the deeper meaning of official recognition. "Now everyone will know that great-grandfather was a real inventor, not just someone who liked to tinker." The afternoon brought visitors they had been expecting for weeks, representatives from the Smithsonian Institution who wanted to acquire some of Williams' original prototypes for a permanent exhibition on American innovation. The proposal honored both the technical brilliance of his work and the human story of persistence in the face of corporate suppression. "Mr. Bennett, your grandfather's story represents something essential about the American spirit," the curator explained as they toured the workshop. "Individual inventors changing the world through determination and creativity, even when facing overwhelming opposition from established interests." As the Smithsonian team cataloged William's earliest prototypes, Jack noticed a familiar black sedan pulling into the driveway. His heart rate quickened momentarily before he recognized it wasn't Victor Richardson at the wheel but Eleanor. She emerged from the car alone, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Jack remembered. The corporate matriarch who had once viewed him with undisguised disdain now approached the farmhouse with hesitant steps. "Hello, Jack," she said when he met her on the porch. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," he replied, genuinely surprised by her visit. "Would you like to come in?" Eleanor glanced toward the workshop where Sam was enthusiastically explaining his great-grandfather's inventions to the Smithsonian curators. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Sam, if that's all right with you." The request was unexpected, but Jack saw no reason to refuse. "He's in the workshop. I'll get him." "No," Eleanor said quickly. "I'd like to see the workshop too, if I may. Victor has told me so much about it." Jack led her across the yard, wondering what had prompted this unannounced visit. Victor hadn't contested Judge Grant's ruling, choosing instead to settle quickly and quietly. The Richardson family had maintained a careful distance since the court decision, neither acknowledging defeat nor seeking reconciliation. When they entered the workshop, Sam looked up from his demonstration, his expression shifting from excitement to wariness at the sight of his grandmother. "Hello, Samuel," Eleanor said, using his full name as she always had. "You've grown since I saw you last." "Hello, grandmother," Sam replied with the careful politeness Jack had taught him. An awkward silence fell, broken only when the Smithsonian curator tactfully suggested they step outside to give the family some privacy. Once alone, Eleanor surveyed the workshop with genuine interest, her eyes lingering on William's original workbench and the framed blueprints that now adorn the walls. "Victor never really understood what William was trying to create here," she said finally. "He saw patents and profits, not the vision behind them." "And you?" Jack asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I grew up during the oil crisis of the 1970s. I remember waiting in gas lines with my parents, watching them worry about heating bills. I understood what energy independence would mean for ordinary families." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "I found this among Howard Richardson's papers after he died. I think it belongs here." Jack accepted the book, opening it to discover William Bennett's handwriting, a personal journal that predated the technical notebooks they'd found in the hidden compartment. "William and Howard were friends before they were business partners," Eleanor explained. "They met during the war, both young engineers with big dreams. Howard wanted to build an energy empire. William wanted to free families from that empire. In the end, Howard's vision won out, but I don't think he was ever truly at peace with what he'd done." She turned to Sam, who had been listening with rapt attention. "Your great-grandfather was a remarkable man, Samuel. I'm sorry my family kept his inventions from the world for so long." The apology was unexpected, and Jack could see it meant a great deal to Sam. The boy had struggled to understand why his maternal grandparents had tried to separate him from his father, why they'd fought so hard against William's legacy. "Thank you for bringing the journal," Sam said quietly. "We'll keep it with great-grandfather's other papers." Eleanor nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "Victor and we've been discussing our relationship with you both. We were wrong about many things, especially about your father. If you're willing, we'd like to try again, not as adversaries, but as family." The offer hung in the air, representing a potential healing that Jack hadn't thought possible. He looked at Sam, leaving the decision to his son. "I'd like that," Sam said after a moment's consideration. "Great-grandfather would want us to be a family again." As Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused at the workshop door. "Howard always said William was the better man. I think he was right, and I think that quality has passed down through the generations." She glanced meaningfully at Jack. "Lisa would be proud of what you've built here, not just the company or the technology, but the home you've created for her son." After she departed, Jack found himself standing in the same spot where he'd first contemplated their impossible situation a year earlier. The view was the same: rolling fields, distant mountains, the oak tree where Sam now had his promised treehouse. But everything else had been transformed by their decision to fight for what was right. The financial security was wonderful, of course. Never again would they worry about paying bills or providing Sam with opportunities he deserved. But the real treasure was something more valuable than money: the knowledge that they had honored Lisa's memory and William's legacy while proving that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. Rachel joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his with the ease of someone who had found her place in their family. "Penny, for your thoughts." "Just thinking about how much has changed," Jack replied. "A year ago, I was working double shifts at the diner and worrying about eviction notices. Now we're launching a company that could transform how people access energy. And you're still the same man who was willing to live in a leaking farmhouse to keep his son. Rachel said, her voice warm with affection. That's what matters most. Sam approached from the workshop carrying William's newly recovered journal with the reverence he showed for all his great-grandfather's belongings. Dad, can we read this tonight? I want to know more about great-grandfather's friendship with Mr. Richardson. Absolutely, Jack agreed. It's important to understand how things went wrong between them. Might help us avoid making the same mistakes. As evening settled over the farmhouse, the three of them gathered in the living room that had once been cold and drafty, but now radiated comfort and security. Jack opened William's journal and began reading aloud, sharing the thoughts of a man whose vision had finally come to fruition generations after he'd first imagined what. Outside, the April evening painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the farmhouse that had sheltered 3 generations of Bennett dreamers, a family that had been forged through adversity, looked toward a future bright with possibility. They had faced impossible odds and found the courage to fight back. They had honored the past while building a future. Most importantly, they had discovered that some inheritances, courage, determination, and the willingness to stand up for what was right were worth more than all the money in the world. Are you ready for tomorrow? Jack asked Sam as they prepared for bed. Ready for anything, the boy replied with the confidence of someone who had learned that impossible was just another word for difficult. And as the farmhouse settled into peaceful quiet, protected by the legacy of one brilliant inventor and sustained by the courage of the family who had fought to claim it, Jack Bennett knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to honor the dreams of a man who had trusted them to carry his vision forward into a world that desperately needed innovation guided by wisdom and powered by hope. The Bennett farmhouse stands as testimony to what determination can achieve against impossible odds. What began as a desperate move to keep a family together uncovered a legacy that would change the world. In the dust-covered workshop of a forgotten inventor, a father and son discovered not just technological brilliance, but the inheritance that truly matters. Courage to stand against power wisdom, to use that power wisely, and love that sustains through the darkest storms. They lost security and certainty along the way. They risked everything: their home, their relationship, their future. The path demanded sacrifices that tested their resolve daily, from leaking roofs to corporate intimidation. Yet in those struggles, they forged something unbreakable between them. The true power of William Bennett's invention wasn't the electricity it generated, but the light it shone on what matters most. A man's legacy isn't measured in patents or millions, but in the values that outlive him, passed down through generations like a beacon through time. As night falls on the farmhouse, one wonders, what inheritance are we protecting for those who will follow us? What battles seemingly impossible today might be worth fighting for tomorrow?